It's a bit more cheery than the other one. He goes, I was wandering cross country, not feeling any shame, not caring about nothing and not taking any blame, because I knew that something good was going to come along when this man came on to tell me about the stuff he thought was wrong. I said, you got no idea, pal, and you haven't heard my plan. He said, my God, I know your face, and then he turned around and ran. When I pulled into the station, the platform was bare and I couldn't quite remember just what I was doing there. In the town I had arrived at, the weeds grew pretty deep, and when I went to the bar, I found the barman was asleep. So I helped myself to a beer and knocked it back in one, and then I took out my guitar and I began to play a song. By the end of the day, as the sun was slowly sinking, I was sick of sitting, getting drunk and singing songs and thinking, so I packed away my things and I lit a cigarette. Then I went to the casino because it helped me to forget. Inside I found the townsfolk bustling around, but the moment that they saw me, they all ran to ground. The maitre d' came over and asked me with scorn just what I was doing there. He said that I stood warned. Then 3 big men came over and stood right in my way. One smiled at me and I smiled back, not quite sure what to say. He said, we don't want your problems. I said, I ain't got none. Then he hooked his thumb and told me it was time that I was gone. But before I took my leave, a man in a white suit, he took me by the arm and he asked if I could shoot. I said, I ain't some kind of villain, but I can hold a gun. He said, well, good for you, but do you have one? I said, I keep an old 6-shooter at the bottom of my bag. He said to keep it down in case loose tongues began to wag. He led me to the back where the smoke was pretty thick. A bunch of guys were playing stud around a candlestick. One handed me a cigar and asked me if I would kill a man at close range and in cold blood. I said, well, that depends on what the man had done. He said, don't ask me any questions, just tell me you're the one. I said, I don't know, maybe, if the price was right and if there was some way I could get out of town that night. He said my passage was assured, and then he laid down his hand. He had the ace, the king, the queen, the jack and the 10, just like he planned. I asked him who it was I was to kill so viciously. He said his name was Mike Malone and he looked a lot like me. I left out through the back door and headed for the plains, relieved that no one in the town knew my real name. In the distance I could see, silhouetted against the sky, the house of the man that I would kill and not ask why. I took my gun out of my pack to check that it had rounds, and I crept up on the hillside trying not to make a sound. Eventually I could see the warmth of the fire through an open window past a rusty ring of wire. I moved the wire slowly and slipped onto the grounds, hoping that I wouldn't wake his loyal hunting hounds. I could see he was a man of significant wealth, so I turned my hat around for significant stealth. I crept in through the window as quiet as a moot, looking around wildly for someone I could shoot. The hearth was looking homely and the flagstones were warm. It was the sort of place you could take shelter from the storm. So I didn't hear him come in, and before I turned around, he'd beat me on the head and I had fallen to the ground. By the time I woke up, I was tied to a bed. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of his head. He stepped out of the darkness. He looked a lot like me. I said, you're Mike Malone. He said, how do you know me? I said, I'm sorry that I broke in. I was just passing by and this place looked pretty homely, like somewhere I could lie. Well, you can't lie to me, he said with a grin. You think that you may know me, but you don't know my sins. His lips parted slightly and he shot me a warning, then left me tied up on the bed until the morning. I swear I never slept a breath that night, and when the morning came, I was ready for the fight. But the morning came and passed, and the man never returned. I thought about my story, wondered what it was I'd learned. I thought about it long and hard before trying to break free. Then I realised that he was somewhere living as me, because far off in the distance I could hear the townsfolk cry, and I knew that they were coming, and that I was going to die.
Whoa.
Thank you.